The ink was barely dry on the deed transfer when Julian Thorne looked at his young lover and smiled. He thought he had just pulled off the perfect crime. He had secretly moved 4 luxury properties and $10 million in liquid assets into her name, hiding them just days before serving his wife divorce papers. He felt like a king. He felt untouchable. But Julian made one fatal calculation error. He forgot to check who actually signed the checks at the bottom of the family trust. In the high-stakes world of New York real estate, possession isn't 9/10 of the law, control is. And Julian was about to find out that while he was playing checkers, his quiet, boring wife had been playing 4D chess for 20 years. This is the story of a man who signed his life away, and the woman who let him do it. October 14th, 2023. The private room at Le Coucou in Manhattan. The air smelled of truffle butter and ambition. Julian Thorne, 48 years old and wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than most people's cars, swirled his Pinot Noir. Across from him sat Eleanor Vance. At 26, Eleanor was a vision of carefully constructed beauty, the kind that required Pilates, dermatologists, and a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by food. "Is it done?" she whispered, her eyes darting to the leather portfolio on the table. Julian smirked, the expression of a man who believes he is the smartest person in the room. He slid the portfolio across the white tablecloth. The deed to the Soho loft, the title for the Aston Martin, and the pièce de résistance, the transfer documents for the Hamptons estate. It's all in your name, Elena, effective immediately. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. It wasn't love that made her shake. It was the sheer volume of equity staring back at her. And Victoria? She suspects nothing? Victoria, Julian scoffed, cutting into his steak, is currently obsessing over her roses in Connecticut. She thinks I'm at a board meeting for the foundation. My wife is a piece of furniture, Elena. Reliable, stationary, and utterly oblivious. I've been moving assets under the guise of diversification for 6 months. By the time I serve her the papers next week, on our 20th anniversary no less, these assets will be legally yours, untouchable during the divorce proceedings because they're no longer mine. It was a cruel plan, a plan devised by a man who had grown bored of stability. Julian Thorne was the face of Thorne Capital, a boutique investment firm. He was charismatic, loud, and loved the spotlight. His wife, Victoria Sterling Thorne, was the opposite. She was old money, quiet money, the kind of woman who wore cashmere sweaters that looked plain but cost $3,000, and who rarely spoke at dinner parties. Julian found her suffocating. Elena was his oxygen, or rather, his adrenaline. "You're sure this is watertight?" Elena asked, tracing her signature on the document. "My lawyer friend, Marcus, said that if the funds came from a marital account—" "Stop!" Julian interrupted, his voice dropping. "I didn't use a marital account. I used the distributions from the Sterling Thorne family trust. It's my money, Elena. I earned it. I grew the firm. Victoria just sat there and watched. I'm simply taking what I'm owed before the lawyers try to carve me up." He reached across the table and took her hand. "This is our insurance policy. When I leave her, she'll try to freeze everything. But she can't freeze what I don't own. You own it now. We'll weather the storm in the Hamptons house, and in 6 months, we'll be free." Elena smiled, a predatory glint in her eyes. "To freedom, Julian." "To us," he replied. They clinked glasses, the crystal chiming like a warning bell Julian was too deaf to hear. What Julian failed to mention, or perhaps what he had conveniently forgotten in his arrogance, was the history of that trust. He had married Victoria 20 years ago, At the time, he was a scrappy junior analyst with big dreams and zero capital. Victoria was the sole heiress to the sterling industrial fortune. When they married, her father, a ruthless titan of industry named Alistair Sterling, had insisted on a very specific, very complex financial structure. Julian had signed those papers 20 years ago without reading the fine print, too blinded by the prospect of marrying into millions. He assumed that because he was the one making the investment decisions for the last decade, he was the one in control. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that he had also quietly gifted to Elena on paper to avoid asset division. I have to go back to Connecticut tonight. One last weekend of playing the happy husband. Then Monday morning, I drop the bomb. Elena pouted. Don't sleep with her. Julian laughed, a cold, harsh sound. I haven't touched Victoria in 3 years. That part won't be difficult. He paid the bill, using the corporate card, of course, and walked out into the cool New York night, feeling invincible. He had just successfully hidden nearly $15 million in assets. He was a genius. As his town car pulled away, he didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street. He didn't see the telephoto lens retracting into the passenger window, and he certainly didn't know that the private investigator behind the camera was currently uploading the photos directly to a private server. A server accessed only by one person, Victoria Thorne. October 17th, 2023. The Thorne residence, Greenwich, Connecticut. The dining room was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock that had been in Victoria's family since the 1800s. The table was set for 2. Sterling silver, fine china, candlelight. Victoria sat at the head of the table. She was 46, with silver blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She wore a navy silk dress. Her face was unreadable, her posture perfect. She looked like a queen waiting for an execution. Julian breezed in, loosening his tie, feigning exhaustion. Sorry I'm late, darling. Traffic on the I-95 was a nightmare, and the merger talks with the Japanese group ran long. Happy anniversary, Julian, Victoria said. Her voice was calm, devoid of warmth, but also devoid of anger. Julian paused. He had actually forgotten the specific date, despite mentioning it to Elena. He quickly recovered. Of course. Happy anniversary, Vic. 20 years. Who would have thought? He sat down, pouring himself a drink from the decanter. He needed the liquid courage. The envelope containing the divorce filing was currently sitting in his briefcase in the hallway. He planned to give it to her after dessert. A final act of cruelty, ruining the memory of the marriage on the very day it began. I made your favorite, Victoria said, signaling to the housekeeper to bring out the beef Wellington. We have much to discuss. We do, Julian nodded. He decided to speed up the timeline. He couldn't stomach the food. Actually, Victoria, before we eat, there's something I need to tell you. Victoria placed her napkin in her lap and folded her hands. She looked him directly in the eyes. Her eyes were a piercing, icy blue. Is it about Elena Vance? The air left the room. Julian froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. What? Elena Vance, Victoria repeated, pronouncing the name as if it were a mild bacterial infection. The former hostess, currently influencer, aged 26. Lives in the West Village. You've been paying her rent for 8 months. And 3 days ago, you met her at Le Coucou and handed her a portfolio containing the deeds to the Hamptons house and the Soho loft. Julian slammed his glass down. Wine sloshed onto the table. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting the family interests, Victoria corrected. There is a difference. Julian stood up, his face reddening. The shock was replaced instantly by aggression. Fine. You want to do this now? Let's do this now. Yes, I'm seeing her. Yes, I'm in love with her. And yes, I'm leaving you. The papers are in the hall. He paced the room, his voice rising. I'm done, Victoria. I'm done with your coldness. I'm done with your boring friends. And I'm done living in this mausoleum. I built Thorn Capital. I made the money, and I'm taking what's mine. Victoria didn't move. She didn't cry. She picked up her fork. You think you made the money, Julian? I grew the portfolio by 400% in 10 years, he shouted. While you sat here arranging flowers, I earned every penny. And you know what? You can't touch the assets I gave Elena. They're gone, legally gifted. They are outside the marital estate. So you can try to sue me. You can try to drag this out. But I've already won. I have the houses, I have the liquidity, and I have the girl. He leaned over the table, sneering. You have this big, empty house, and your cats. I'd suggest you sign the papers quickly, or I'll make the press coverage very ugly for you. Victoria took a small bite of the beef, chewed slowly, and swallowed. She took a sip of water. Then she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Julian, she said softly, you really should have read the trust indenture my father drafted in 2003. I know what it says, Julian snapped. I'm the grantor. I have power of appointment. No, Victoria said. You are the investment advisor to the trust. You have the power to buy and sell stocks. You have the power to manage the portfolio. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick document, bound in blue legal paper. She dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. But the assets, the houses, the cars, the cash accounts, they are titled to the Sterling Thorn Irrevocable Trust. Julian rolled his eyes. Semantics. I have signature authority. For operational expenses, Victoria clarified, but for any transfer of title, for any gift exceeding $10,000, for any alienation of real property. She opened the document to page 42. She spun it around so he could see. It requires the signature of the primary trustee. Julian looked at the page. He saw the clause, Article 7, Section C, Disposition of Capital Assets. I signed the deeds, Julian yelled. The lawyers accepted them. Your lawyers did, Victoria said, because you lied to them and told them you had full authority. But the county clerk, the bank compliance officers, they checked the trust documents, Julian. She leaned forward. Who is the primary trustee, Julian? Julian stared at the paper. His vision blurred. He looked at the name printed in bold letters at the bottom of the definition list. Primary trustee, Victoria Sterling Thorn. I am the trustee, Victoria whispered. I have always been the trustee. You just manage the money. I own it. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. But the deeds. I physically handed them to Elena. You handed her pieces of paper, Victoria said, returning to her meal. Worthless pieces of paper. The transfer of the Hamptons estate was flagged by the title company yesterday morning. They called me for authorization. I declined it. She looked up at him, her eyes calm and deadly. I froze the transfer, Julian. I froze the bank accounts. I froze the corporate cards. As of 9 a.m. this morning, you don't have access to a single penny that isn't in your personal checking account. And last I checked, that account has about $4,000 in it? Julian gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. You can't do that. That's my money. I worked for it. It's the trust's money, Victoria corrected. And as trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets from irrational behavior, like giving away $4 million to a waitress. She picked up a small silver bell and rang it. The butler appeared. "Charles," Victoria said. "Mr. Thorne will be leaving now. Please ensure he takes only his personal clothing. He is not to remove any artwork, electronics or watches, as those are listed as trust property." "Yes, madam," Charles said, his face impassive. Julian stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The reality was crashing down on him. He hadn't secured his future. He had just confessed to adultery, attempted fraud against the family trust, and tried to embezzle millions, all while handing his wife the perfect legal weapon to destroy him. "You're bluffing," Julian whispered. "Elena." "The loft." "Oh, the loft?" Victoria took a sip of wine. "I actually called the building manager of the Soho loft an hour ago. I informed them that an unauthorized squatter might try to gain access. They've changed the locks." She looked at her watch. "Elena is probably trying to get in right now. It must be very embarrassing for her." October 17th, 2023. 9:45 p.m. Soho, Manhattan. While Julian was watching his life disintegrate in a Connecticut dining room, Elena Vance was standing on the cobblestones of Mercer Street, battling with a heavy Louis Vuitton trunk and a sense of rising panic. She had spent the day fantasizing about this moment. This was supposed to be her victory lap. The Soho loft was a masterpiece of industrial chic. Exposed brick, 20-foot ceilings, and a private elevator. It was the physical manifestation of the life she felt she deserved. Julian had given her the keycard 2 days ago, a heavy black rectangle that felt like a passport to a new world. She dragged her suitcase to the private entrance and tapped the card against the reader. Nothing. A small red light blinked mockingly. Elena frowned. She tapped it again. Harder. Blink. Blink. Red. "Come on," she hissed, looking around. The street was quiet, but she felt exposed. She typed in the manual override code Julian had written down for her. Access denied. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. She pulled out her phone and dialed Julian. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. "Excuse me, miss." Elena spun around. A man in a dark uniform was standing in the doorway of the main lobby entrance, a few feet away. It wasn't the usual friendly weekend doorman. This guy looked like security. He had a clipboard and a face carved out of granite. "I live here," Elena lied, projecting the confidence she had honed over years of navigating VIP lists. "My key card is malfunctioning. If you could just let me into the penthouse B elevator." The guard looked down at his clipboard, then back at her. "Name?" "Elena Vance. I'm a guest of Mr. Thorne. Actually, I'm the owner, as of this week." The guard didn't blink. "I have strict instructions regarding Penthouse B, Ms. Vance. The locks have been electronically recoded as of 6:04 p.m. This evening per the owner's request." "I am the owner." Elena's voice rose an octave, echoing off the brick buildings. She fumbled in her oversized tote bag, her hands shaking, until she pulled out the thick envelope Julian had given her. She ripped it open and thrust the deed at the guard. "Look, see? Quitclaim deed. Transferred to Elena Vance. It's right there. Now let me in." The guard didn't even touch the paper. He stepped back, his hand hovering near his radio. "Ma'am, I've been informed by the building's management company, Sterling Properties, that the deed you possess is considered fraudulent and has been flagged by the county clerk. I cannot grant you access." Sterling Properties. The name hit her like a physical slap. Victoria's maiden name. "That's ridiculous," Elena stammered, though her confidence was fracturing. "Julian Thorne signed this." "Mr. Thorne does not hold the title to this building," the guard said, his voice flat. "The Sterling Thorne Trust does. and the trustee has issued a no trespass order for an individual matching your description. He looked at her suitcase. If you attempt to force entry, or if you remain on the premises, I have been instructed to call the NYPD. We have your photograph on file at the desk. Elena stood there, mouth agape. The humiliation was total. A couple walking their dog slowed down to watch the scene, the beautiful girl in the expensive coat being treated like a vagrant. "Fine," she spat, grabbing the handle of her trunk. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." She turned and marched away, the wheels of her suitcase clattering loudly on the uneven stones. She turned the corner and collapsed onto a bench, her breathing shallow. She pulled out her phone again. Text to Julian. "Pick up the phone. The key doesn't work. The guard says the deed is fake. What is going on?" No reply. She opened her banking app. Julian had transferred $50,000 into her checking account yesterday as a shopping budget for the new place. Account status: frozen. Alert: suspicious activity. Reversal pending. Elena screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure rage. She tapped on the transaction details. The transfer hadn't cleared. It had been recalled. She was standing on a street corner in Manhattan with 3 suitcases, a maxed-out credit card of her own, and a stack of legal documents that were apparently worthless. She needed help. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Marcus Law. Marcus was an ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago, a junior associate at a mid-tier firm who still carried a torch for her. He answered on the second ring. "Elena, everything okay?" "Marcus, I need you," she said, her voice trembling. "I have a deed, a signed, notarized deed for a property, and the building won't let me in. They say it's invalid because of a trust." There was a pause on the line, the sound of Marcus shifting in his chair. "Elena, slow down. Who signed the deed?" Julian Thorne. "And the property? Who was it titled to before?" "The trust, the Sterling Thorne Trust." "But Julian is the husband. He said he moved it to me." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Elena, listen to me carefully. If the property is in a trust, Julian doesn't own it. The trust owns it. Unless Julian is the sole trustee with unchecked powers of appointment, which is rare for family wealth of that size, he can't just sign a deed. It's not his house to give." "But he signed it," Elena cried. "I have the paper." "It's a clouded title," Marcus explained, his voice turning professional and pitying. "If he signed a deed for property, he doesn't legally own personally. That's not a transfer. That's fraud. Elena, did you give him anything in return? Did you sign anything?" "No," she whispered. "Okay. Where is Julian now?" "I don't know. He's not answering." "Elena," Marcus said gently, "you need to get to a hotel. Use your own cash. Do not try to enter that apartment again. If the trust is involved, and if it's old money like the Sterlings, they will have lawyers who eat people like us for breakfast. If you try to force that deed, they could charge you with receiving stolen property or conspiracy to commit fraud." Elena ended the call. She looked at the luxury apartment building one last time. The lights were on in the penthouse. She could see the warm glow of the chandelier she had picked out in a catalogue with Julian just last week. It looked so warm up there, and it was so cold down here. She hailed a taxi, shoving her luggage into the trunk. "Motel 6 near JFK," she said to the driver. It was the only place she could afford on her own cards. As the city blurred past the window, Elena stopped crying. The tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Julian had promised her the world. If he couldn't deliver, she wasn't going to go down as his accomplice. She was going to be his victim. October 18th, 2023, 8:08 a.m. The Hyatt Regency, Greenwich. Julian woke up with a crick in his neck and a headache that felt like a drill press. He was in a standard king room at the Hyatt, a 10-minute drive from the mansion he had been kicked out of the night before. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. 47 missed calls from Eleanor. 12 missed calls from his office. 1 email from Victoria. He opened the email first. Subject: Notice of forensic audit. From V. Thorne. Attachment: Legal. Notice: Preservation of success. Evidence. PDF. Julian, the locks at the office have been changed. Your access to the company servers has been suspended, pending an internal investigation into the misappropriation of trust assets. Do not attempt to contact clients. Please direct all communication to my attorney, Arthur Sterling. V. Julian threw the phone across the bed. "She can't do this!" he yelled at the empty room. "I built that firm!" He showered quickly, dressed in the same suit he had worn the night before, now rumpled, and drove his car. Thankfully, the Mercedes was in his name, or not the trust's, into the city. He needed a lawyer, not his usual corporate counsel who would be beholden to Victoria, but a killer. He went to the offices of Vane and Associates. Elias Vane was known as the Divorce Devil of New York. He cost $500 an hour, and he was worth every penny. Julian sat in Vane's glass-walled office, recounting the story. He left out some details, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive wife who was withholding his hard-earned money. He laid the copies of the deeds and the transfer documents on the desk. "So," Julian finished, leaning back, "I need you to file an emergency injunction, unfreeze my accounts, get me back into my house, and validate these transfers to Elena." Elias Vane was a small man with sharp features and glasses that magnified his eyes. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at the documents. He flipped through them slowly, his expression shifting from boredom to amusement to disbelief. Finally, Vane took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Thorne," Vane said softly, "you are in a significant amount of trouble." "I know she's playing hardball," Julian said dismissively. "That's why I hired you. Hit her back." "No, you don't understand," Vane said. He spun the deed around. "You attempted to transfer real estate held in an irrevocable trust. Who drafted this deed?" "I did," Julian said. "I used a template online. I didn't want the lawyers to tip her off." Vane laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "You, a finance professional, used an online template to transfer a $10 million asset out of a trust without the trustee's signature? I'm the investment advisor, which means you pick stocks." Vane slammed his hand on the desk, making Julian jump. "It does not mean you own the corpus of the trust. Julian, this isn't a marital dispute anymore. This is criminal fraud. You forged, essentially, the authority to alienate property you do not own." Vane stood up and walked to the window. "Let me explain your position. Victoria holds all the cards. The assets are hers. The house is hers. The firm, let me guess, the start-up capital for Thorne Capital came from the trust?" Julian swallowed. "A seed loan." "Yes." "And the operating agreement? Who holds the majority voting shares?" "The trust holds 51%. I hold 49%. "So she owns your company too," Vane said, turning back to him. "She fired you this morning because she has the votes to do it. And she locked you out because she has cause, breach of fiduciary duty." Julian felt the room spinning. "So, what? I walk away with nothing? I have 20 years of marriage, equitable distribution." "Normally, yes," Vane said. "But you just tried to hide $15 million 3 days before filing. That's called dissipation of marital assets. Judges hate that. But it's worse. Since the assets weren't even marital, they were trust assets. You tried to steal from her family. Vane sat down and leaned forward. Here is the reality, Julian. Victoria isn't going to sue you for divorce. She is going to hold a criminal complaint over your head. If you fight her for alimony, if you fight her for the house, she will hand these deeds to the district attorney. Attempted grand larceny, fraud, forgery. Julian slumped in his chair. He looked small. The arrogance of the night before at Le Coucou was gone, replaced by the terrified realization of a man who had jumped off a cliff without checking his parachute. "What do I do?" Julian whispered. "You beg," Vane said coldly. "We go to her lawyer. We offer a quiet settlement. You walk away with your personal checking account, your clothes, and maybe we negotiate a small severance to keep you from starving, and in exchange, you sign a confession admitting to the attempted fraud so she has insurance, and you disappear." "And Elena?" Julian asked. "The assets I promised her." Vane chuckled, shaking his head. "The mistress? Forget her. She's a liability. In fact, if she tries to cash any of those checks or enter those properties, she could be arrested too. If you care about her, tell her to run. But my advice? Cut her loose. Because right now, Julian, you are radioactive." Julian walked out of the office into the bright midday sun of Manhattan. The city moved around him. Billionaires in cars, tourists taking photos, people rushing to lunch. He felt like a ghost. His phone buzzed. It was Eleanor again. Text: "You lied to me. I'm at a motel in Queens. The police were called at the loft. Fix this, Julian. Fix this, or I'm going to the press." Julian stared at the screen. He thought about the woman he loved. He thought about the wife he hated. And he realized with a sickening clarity that he was terrified of both of them. He didn't reply to Eleanor. Instead, he walked to a park bench, sat down, and put his head in his hands. He had played the game of kings, but he had forgotten he was just a pawn. But Julian Thorne wasn't a man who gave up easily. As he sat there, a dark thought began to form. If the law couldn't help him, and if begging wasn't his style, there had to be another way. Victoria had a weak spot. Everyone had a weak spot. He remembered something, a small, seemingly insignificant detail about the trust that Victoria had mentioned years ago during a wine-fueled dinner, back when they were happy. Something about the successor trustee clause. If Victoria were incapacitated, who took control? He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A private investigator who did work that wasn't exactly forensic accounting. "It's Julian," he said, his voice low. "I need you to find out who the successor trustee is for the Sterling Thorne Trust. And I need dirt on them. Today. October 19th, 2023. 2:00 p.m. The Sterling Foundation headquarters, Midtown Manhattan." Victoria sat in her father's old office, surrounded by oil paintings of dead men who had built railroads and steel mills. She looked calm, but beneath the surface, she was exhausted. Dismantling a 20-year marriage was like demolishing a building. Even a controlled implosion creates a lot of dust. "Has he surrendered?" she asked, looking out the window at the skyline. Arthur Sterling, her cousin and the family's longtime general counsel, shook his head. "Not yet. Vane contacted us. They're fishing. Asking for copies of the trust indenture, asking for the bylaws of the foundation. Julian isn't folding, Victoria. He's looking for a crack in the armor." "There are no cracks," Victoria said firmly. "My father wrote that trust to be ironclad." "The trust is solid," Arthur agreed. "But Julian is desperate. A desperate man is dangerous. He's been making calls. our security team flagged a query into the successor trustee provisions. Victoria turned around, her eyes narrowing. He thinks he can remove me. He thinks if you are unfit or removed, the control shifts. He's hoping the successor is someone he can manipulate or bribe. Victoria actually laughed. It was a genuine warm laugh for the first time in days. Oh, poor Julian. He really didn't read the document, did he? Apparently not. Who does he think it is? My Uncle Robert? Or perhaps one of the board members he plays golf with? He's about to find out, Arthur said, checking his phone, because he just requested a meeting with the successor trustee, and I approved it. October 19th, 4 p.m. A hole-in-the-wall diner in Hell's Kitchen. Julian sat in a booth with peeling, red vinyl seats. He felt out of place in his Italian suit, but his investigator had told him this was where the meeting would happen. The investigator had found the name, Alexander Sterling. Julian racked his brain. He knew the Sterling family tree. Alexander must be a distant cousin. Someone young, maybe? Someone hungry? If Julian could convince this Alexander that Victoria was mismanaging the funds, that she was too emotional, too vindictive, maybe he could trigger a vote of no confidence. It was a long shot, but it was his only shot. The door opened. A man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded leather jacket and work boots. He looked like he worked on a construction site, not in a boardroom. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow. He slid into the booth opposite Julian without shaking hands. "You're Julian," the man said. His voice was gravelly. "I am," Julian said, putting on his best salesman smile. "And you must be Alexander Sterling. I appreciate you meeting me. I wanted to discuss a matter of great urgency regarding the family trust. I believe Victoria is acting irrationally, and as the successor trustee, you have a duty—" "Shut up," Alexander said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Julian blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Shut up. You talk too much. Always have." Alexander signaled the waitress for a black coffee. He leaned forward, his eyes dark and hard. "You don't know who I am, do you?" I assume you're a cousin?" "I'm Victoria's brother," Alexander said. Julian froze. Victoria doesn't have a brother. She's an only child. "She's the only legitimate child," Alexander corrected, taking a sip of the coffee the waitress slammed down. "My father, Alistair, had a life before he became the titan of industry. I'm the result. He took care of me, quietly, paid for school, paid for the Marines. And when he wrote that trust, he knew Victoria was soft. He knew she'd marry some smooth-talking shark like you." Alexander smiled, showing teeth that looked ready to bite. "So he made me the successor. The breakdown clause says that if the primary trustee is unable to serve, control passes to me. But it also says that the primary trustee can appoint me as enforcer at any time." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "Victoria appointed me this morning. Do you know what a trust enforcer does, Julian?" Julian shook his head, mute with shock. "It means I don't manage the stocks. I manage the threats," Alexander said. "My job is to ensure that the beneficiaries, Victoria and any future children, are protected from predators. That's you." Alexander leaned in closer. "Victoria is nice. She uses lawyers. She uses paperwork. I don't. I spent 10 years in special ops. I don't care about public relations. I don't care about your reputation." Are you threatening me?" Julian stammered. "I'm educating you," Alexander said. "You have 24 hours to sign the settlement Victoria offered. You take your personal cash, you take your clothes, and you sign the divorce papers. If you don't, if you try to sue, or if you try to drag Victoria's name through the mud in the press." Alexander didn't finish the sentence. He just tapped the table 3 times. "Victoria wants you gone. I want you destroyed. Don't make me get what I want." Alexander stood up, threw a $20 bill on the table and walked out. Julian sat there for a long time. His plan to manipulate the successor had backfired spectacularly. He wasn't dealing with a greedy cousin. He was dealing with a ghost from the family's past. A man who was clearly the muscle behind the money. His phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. Text: "I'm talking to a reporter from the NY Post in 1 hour. If you don't bring me $50K in cash by then, I'm telling them everything. The fraud, the trust, all of it." Julian stared at the phone. He was trapped between a rock, Alexander, and a hard place, Elena, and the walls were closing in fast. October 19th, 5:30 p.m., a coffee shop in Queens. Elena Vance checked her makeup in her compact mirror. She looked tired. The fluorescent lights of the motel had drained her, but she still looked fierce. Across from her sat a woman with a notepad and a digital recorder. Sarah Jenkins, a gossip columnist for the Post. "So," Sarah said, clicking the pen, "you say you have proof that Julian Thorne, the golden boy of Wall Street, is actually broke and a fraud?" "I have deeds," Elena said, tapping her bag. "I have text messages. He promised me millions. He signed over houses he didn't own. He used me." "And the wife?" Sarah asked. "Victoria Sterling." "She's a witch," Elena spat. "She locked me out. She froze everything. She knew what he was doing, and she let him do it just to humiliate me." "This is dynamite," Sarah said, eyes gleaming. "The billionaire fraudster and the scorned lover. We can run this on the front page tomorrow." Elena smiled. This was her leverage. If Julian wouldn't pay, the world would know his shame. And maybe she could get a book deal out of it. Suddenly, the bell above the door chimed. Elena looked up, expecting Julian. It wasn't Julian. It was Victoria Thorne. She walked into the cheap coffee shop like she was walking into a ballroom. She wore a trench coat and sunglasses. She spotted them immediately and walked over. "Victoria?" Elena gasped. Sarah, the reporter, looked like she had just won the lottery. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm Sarah Jenkins. I know who you are," Victoria said coolly. She ignored the reporter and looked directly at Eleanor. "Eleanor, you look tired." "Get away from me," Eleanor hissed. "I'm telling her everything. How your husband promised me the world. How he hates you." "I'm sure he does," Victoria said. She reached into her purse. "But before you tell your story, Elena, you might want to see this." She placed a single photograph on the table. It was a picture of Julian. He was sitting at a table at Le Coucou the night he gave Elena the deeds. But the angle was different. It was taken from behind him. You could see his phone screen. He was texting someone. Recipient, baby 2. Message, just gave the bimbo the fake deeds. She bought it hook, line, and sinker. I'll move the real assets to our Cayman account next week. Love you. Elena stared at the photo. Her blood turned to ice. Baby. 2. Julian has a lot of secrets, Victoria said softly. You thought you were the other woman, Elena. You were just a other woman. He's been seeing a flight attendant based in Miami for 2 years. He calls her Baby 2. You were the distraction. You were the one he was going to set up to take the fall if the SEC ever looked into his finances. Victoria leaned in. He didn't sign those deeds to give you the houses, Elena. He signed them to you so that if the fraud was discovered, your name would be on the documents. He was setting you up to go to prison for him. Elena felt sick. The room swayed. No, he loves me. He loves money, Victoria corrected, and he loves himself. He played us both. But I knew. You didn't. Victoria turned to the reporter. Ms. Jenkins, you can run your story. But if you do, I will release the full forensic audit showing that Ms. Vance here knowingly accepted stolen property. I have the receipts. I have the surveillance. She will be arrested before the ink is dry on your paper. Sarah, the reporter, looked at the photo, then at Victoria, then at Elena. She capped her pen. I need to verify sources. This is getting too legally complicated for me. She grabbed her bag and bolted. Elena was left alone with Victoria. She looked at the photo of Julian's text again. The bimbo. Tears streamed down Elena's face. Not fake tears this time. Real ugly tears of humiliation. He really said that. He did, Victoria said. Her voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was almost pitying. He's a narcissist, Elena. He uses people. He used 20 years of my life. He used 8 months of yours. Victoria slid a check across the table. Here. Elena looked at it. It was a cashier's check for $25,000. What is this? Severance, Victoria said dryly. It's enough to pay your rent for a few months and get a good therapist. Take it. Leave New York. Delete his number. If I see you again, I won't be this nice. Elena took the check with trembling fingers. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't. She just grabbed her bag and ran out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the Queen's evening. Victoria watched her go. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. It's done, she said to Alexander. The girl is neutralized. She won't talk. She hates him more than I do now. Good, Alexander's voice rasped over the line. Julian is currently in his car, crying. He's ready to sign. Come home, sis. We have a contract to finish. Victoria hung up. She walked out into the cool air, taking a deep breath. She had won. She had saved the trust. She had protected her father's legacy. But as she hailed a cab to take her back to the gilded cage of her life, she didn't feel happy. She just felt heavy. The war was over. But looking at the wreckage of the people Julian had used, herself included, she realized there were no true victors in a game like this. Only survivors. October 20th, 2023. 10 Watt AM, the conference room at Sterling, Vance and Associates. The room was silent, vast and cold. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt designed to preserve dead bodies. At the center of the long mahogany table sat the divorce agreement. It was thick, bound in heavy paper, and final. Julian Thorne sat on one side, alone. His lawyer, Elias Vane, had advised him over the phone to just go in, sign and don't speak, charging him a final $500 for the advice before closing his file. Julian looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 3 days. His suit was the same one from the day before, now visibly wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. Opposite him sat Victoria. She looked pristine in a white power suit. Flanking her was Arthur Sterling, the lawyer, and standing by the door, arms crossed, was Alexander. The brother Julian never knew existed. The terms remain as discussed, Arthur said, sliding a black fountain pen across the table. You receive a lump sum of $50,000 to assist with relocation. You retain your personal vehicle and personal effects. You waive all rights to alimony, equitable distribution, and any claim on the Sterling Thorne Trust or Thorne Capital. Arthur paused. In exchange, you sign the confession of attempted fraud regarding the asset transfers, which we will hold in escrow. If you violate the non-disclosure agreement, or if you ever contact Victoria again, we release the confession to the district attorney. Julian picked up the pen. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. He looked at Victoria. He wanted to scream. He wanted to beg. but the presence of Alexander at the door, a silent, brooding threat, kept him seated. "You really thought of everything," Julian rasped. "You destroyed my life in 72 hours. "You destroyed it yourself, Julian," Victoria said calmly. "I just expedited the demolition." Julian hesitated, the pen hovering over the signature line. "Can I ask you one thing, before I sign?" Victoria nodded once. "Who is she? Baby 2? The flight attendant?" Julian asked, his brow furrowing. "I've been racking my brain all night. I don't know a flight attendant in Miami. I never texted anyone about a Cayman account. I was loyal to Elena. I was an idiot, but I was loyal to her." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then the corner of her lip curled up, a tiny, imperceptible smirk. "I know, Julian." Julian froze. "What?" "I know you didn't have another mistress," Victoria said softly. "I know you were obsessed with Eleanor. Then, the photo, the text message you showed her in the coffee shop." Victoria leaned forward, her voice a whisper that carried across the table like a blade. "Photoshop, Julian. It took Alexander about 5 minutes to mock up a fake text conversation on a screen. We needed Eleanor to hate you. We needed her to feel used, so she would take the money and leave town instead of fighting for you. If she thought you loved her, she might have stayed. She might have caused a scene. But a woman scorned? She'll run." Julian's mouth fell open. You faked it? You lied to her?" "I managed the situation," Victoria corrected. "Just like I've managed your portfolio for 10 years while letting you think you were a genius. I did what was necessary to protect the trust." She pointed to the paper. "Sign now." Julian stared at her. For 20 years he thought he was living with a boring, simple housewife. He realized now he had been sleeping next to a grandmaster strategist. He was terrified. He signed. Julian Thorne. Arthur snatched the papers away the moment the pen lifted. "Done. The check is at the front desk. Security will escort you out." Julian stood up. He felt lightheaded. He walked to the door, passing Alexander. The big man didn't move, but his eyes followed Julian until he was out of the room. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, Julian stood in the hallway. He was 48 years old. He had no job. He had no wife. He had no lover. And he had no money. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and began the long descent to the bottom. 6 months later, Austin, Texas. Elena Vance adjusted her apron. "Order up, table 4, she called out. She was working as a shift manager at a high-end bistro. It wasn't the glamorous life of a Manhattan influencer, but it was real. She had used Victoria's $25,000 to pay off her credit cards and move back closer to her family. She dated a nice guy now, a teacher. He didn't have a trust fund, but he didn't have a secret wife either. Sometimes she thought about the Soho loft, but mostly she thought about how lucky she was to have escaped before the handcuffs came out. Jersey City, New Jersey. Julian Thorne sat in a cubicle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He was working as a junior sales associate for a mid-tier logistics company. It was the only job he could get. His name had been quietly blacklisted on Wall Street. Word spreads fast when the Sterlings want it to. He ate a cold sandwich while scrolling through the news on his phone. A headline caught his eye. Sterling Capital announces record profits under new leadership. He clicked the article. There was a photo of Victoria, looking radiant and powerful, standing next to a rugged man identified as Alexander Sterling, Chief Operations Officer. Julian stared at the photo. He looked at his sandwich. He turned off his phone and went back to cold-calling customers who didn't want to talk to him. The Hamptons. Victoria sat on the terrace of the estate, watching the sunset over the ocean. The house was quiet, But it wasn't empty. Alexander was down on the beach, throwing a stick for a new golden retriever. She took a sip of her tea. The roses were blooming early this year. The trust was secure. The parasite had been removed. She breathed in the salt air, finally feeling the weight of 20 years lift off her shoulders. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She wasn't just an heiress. She was the primary trustee. And for the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly free. And that is the story of Julian Thorne, the man who thought he could outsmart a woman who had been holding the keys to the kingdom the entire time. It's a brutal lesson in the difference between appearing rich and actually controlling the wealth. Julian made the classic mistake. He confused access with ownership. He forgot that in the world of old money, the person who signs the checks is never as powerful as the person who wrote the trust. What do you think? Did Victoria go too far by faking the text message to destroy Julian's relationship with Eleanor? Or was that the perfect boss move to protect her family legacy? And did Julian deserve to lose absolutely everything? Or was the punishment too harsh? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of the 1%, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about financial betrayal, corporate espionage, and real-life drama, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, always read the fine print.